Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen.
I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. And our friends Anne-Marie and Louie are not going to be here today, which is kind of unusual for a Monday recording session. Usually it's at least one or the other. Usually it's both of them, but Anne-Marie's not feeling really good and Louie's got something going on, so we'll catch them next week. But I do have a guest joining me today, which is making it a lot easier to do a podcast because you know how it is. I like to do a podcast with someone. I don't like to talk into a mic in an empty room. That's not so much fun. And I don't have to do that today. Hooray! This is a good day. I love it. Anyway, her name is Jenna Righi, and Jenna is well, she's she's a jewelry designer, excuse me. And she has a jewelry line. And well, a couple thoughts come to mind about that. First of all, if you've been a listener for like almost all the time that I've been doing this podcast, you may remember a gentleman I had on the show back in 2012 when I first got this thing started. And, you know, so there's like three of you who know about this, but you know, that it was like one of the earliest interviews that I did where I was really trying to understand how, and many of you know, I was trying to basically resolve my own issues with financial situations and so forth. So that was one of the reasons I started this thing. And he was one of the earliest people to give me some ideas about that. So here we are 10 and a half years later, and I've got somebody else in basically not quite the exact same field, because Fred was dealing with precious metals, whereas Jenna deals with stainless steel type products. But nevertheless, it's the same kind of thing because she's taken a field that has exploded over the last 40 or 50 years in terms of its creativity, and she's taking it into a new direction. So that's been really, really cool. But more than that, she has a mission in life, and she's going to be telling us about that mission. You know how it is. I don't like to take the mission away from them and take the story away from them. So I'm not going to do that part. I'm going to let her tell her own story. So Jenna, thank you for being on the program today. How you doing?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Walt.
Glad to have you. So, all right, I gave the setup. Tell us the story.
Yeah, so I will have to connect with Greg too. That's awesome. I find it pretty symbolic that 10 years ago you have somebody else on that does jewelry.
Yeah, Fred was his name. Fred, sorry.
Fred. So yeah, I'm super excited to be here and just share kind of how I started my jewelry business. So I always say I'm mission first and jewelry second. And I hate talking about myself, to be honest, but whenever I share my story, people understand the why. So my business is called Link Before You Sink, and it is a jewelry business. And I created it after going through a really difficult time in my life. So we'll set us back to May. It's right before Memorial Day. Well, beginning of May. It went through Memorial Day, 2014. So I was living in South Florida at the time. I was living in Fort Lauderdale with my fiance at the time, and my dad was sick and he had cancer. So my dad passed away. I ended up breaking off that engagement. And then a couple days after my father passed away, I lost a very close family friend of mine. So it was a really dark time in my life, but I knew that I had to leave Florida to come back to my support system, which is in Columbus, Ohio. So I'm originally from Pennsylvania. But I had been in Columbus for a while. I went to school in Ohio. So I knew I needed to leave. And I had nothing. I was working in Florida. I obviously had a job, but I knew that I needed to take my mental health first. So on the drive, I don't even think I put on the radio the entire time on that drive. I left South Florida. I mean, what's that, 22-hour drive?
That's a long drive.
Long drive. But you know what? I made a promise to myself that not if, but when I got back on my feet, I would pay it forward. And I didn't know how I was going to do it at the time. But I told myself, I made that promise to myself that I would try to pay it forward. And it was about 3 years later. So around 2017, I was riding my bike and the chain actually fell off and broke. And I was ticked off. And I remember I looked down and I had an epiphany. It was one of those aha moments, I guess you could call it. The symbolism of links and connection while being broken hit me. And I realized that I could make jewelry charms out of the broken bike chain. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So our mission was set that day, and I have one on now. You can't see it for a lot of the listeners, but our mission was set that day that, to find strength by linking with others. So we do that through our jewelry links. I call them our jewelry links. But we also do that through story sharing. So that is the verb of linking. So with each link that you buy now, the jewelry, you are linked through somebody going through a struggle. So you get like, we do a featured
Wow.
story of the month. So yeah, so that's really like why and how I created it. So we launched it took me a year to test stuff out. Made a lot of mistakes like any business owner does. I launched in November 2018. So yeah, I just feel like it is my calling in life. And I always say I'm mission first, jewelry second.
I'm just impressed. How did you figure out a way to create logistics for connecting people buying jewelry with people being helped? I mean, that in and of itself is a huge victory. How did you pull that off?
Yeah. So, well, the jewelry I made here, I made a lot of mistakes. I mean, and that's why I say just keep going. I feel like all entrepreneurs that get somewhere, they just don't give up. And I knew
That's
it
right.
wasn't and that's why I wasn't about money. It was about my heart. My heart was in it. So I knew I wasn't going to give up. But first of all, the jewelry itself, there was a lot of kinks there because it's stainless steel, but it was coated with an overlay of nickel. Well, I didn't realize I put
Oh,
it in bleach. I put it in bleach. I put it in rubbing alcohol. I'm not allergic to nickel, but I have people test it. They're like, it's itchy, So
yeah.
anyways, I had to have somebody basically recreate how the link was created. And then I knew I wanted to connect with the story sharing. That was hard to do. So back in the day, I wanted it kind of like secret pen pals. So like my father passed away. I believe your father passed away too, correct?
Yes.
Was it
Yes.
cancer? So I wanted it like, okay, if somebody, goes through a struggle, it's because we're gift. A lot of people are buying us for gift. I'd say 80% of people are purchasing our product for gift. I wanted a way that like you could go on there and search for a similar struggle, like loss, for example, and you would get that story. It was a customer service nightmare on the back end. And I think honestly, it almost prevented sales because I was letting people choose, you know what I mean? They were picking their piece and then they were going through and it's like, oh, what story should I choose? Now I have like a QR code that links to our entire blog. It has a featured story at the top. So it's one story now. I do a monthly story, but now you can go on and click the topic for, we got like some really sad stories, childhood cancer or miscarriage or divorce or loss or depression, anxiety. So now you can kind of link. That's kind of the bullet points I would give you with how the verb of the linking came about. But
Yeah.
now we just do a featured story of the month, but it links to our blog.
And when you're bringing the story in, how does the person who is the focal point of the story figure into the transaction?
Everything's online through a blog. So and I have it on, you can buy, I always say you can buy to link with us, like a piece of jewelry, or you can go on and share your story. So there's a story portal that I have on my website. It's all private by first name and state. So if you share to be Walt, Connecticut, we obviously do that for privacy reasons. But you're signing like a terms of service to share your story, but we never share by last name or, because people share some pretty private things. So
Sure.
that's how you submit your story. And then I've just been doing like featured story of the month. We just kind of pick one, and we try to relate it. Like October, I do a breast cancer awareness story. May was mental health awareness. We did a depression story. But again, I link it back to the blog now where you see that featured story, but you can still easily see the topics to choose. Like, oh, I don't really relate maybe necessarily to depression, anxiety, but I just went through a divorce. So now you can, find a story that might resonate with you that way. And that's the verb of linking.
What's been the response from those who initially share their stories that get published, name and state?
That's a great question. So of course I started with my friends. When you got to start somewhere, it's like I went through my friends like, hey, I know somebody that's been divorced. Are you willing to share your story? Jenna, like, are you sure? I'm like, I'll keep it private. That's how we started. You know what I mean? I was using my own resources and trying to collect these stories. And then every single one of them that shared that maybe rolled their eyes at first, like, I'll do this for you. I guess I'll share my story. They came back to me and said, that was so therapeutic for me. I thought that gave me more than I thought it would. You know what I mean? I realized that I thought I was just giving somebody else the gift of hope by sharing my story. But that was everything that I needed. I haven't talked about my divorce in 5 years. I haven't, you know what I mean? Writing it down really was therapeutic for me. I'm like, I told you so. But yeah, that's always the feedback that I get is like, wow, I just thought I was giving somebody the gift of hope, but I think I got more in return by writing it down and, having that therapy for myself.
Yeah, because there is a therapeutic value in writing stuff down, particularly if it's something very traumatic that we've gone through.
Right.
Um, Something about just it isn't even organizing your thoughts; it's just kind of getting it out. 'Cause-
That's so I started it and I thought, oh, I just want to sell jewelry behind the scenes. I don't want to share my story. And then like I hired a business coach. She's like, your business is, I was doing the same thing. It's like,
yeah,
I started off this interview. I don't really like to talk about myself, but here's why we started.
yeah,
You got to remember that by sharing your story, there is, what's that quote? You might not change the world for everyone, but you might change the world for one person. Your
right,
story does give power or, inspire somebody else maybe going through something similar.
right.
But I did the same thing. I was like, I don't want to share my story. They're like, you have to get out there and share your story, especially you can be a hypocrite. You're sharing, you know what I mean? You have a brand that's meant to link others going through struggles, like put yourself out there. And I'll tell you, it's been very therapeutic for me too. And that's why, my heart is so in it because, I always say you can't start a business just with money. Your heart has to be there. And that's why I won't give up those positive responses. And they're all private, you know what I mean? But I get an email or I get a DM in Instagram or Facebook. I screenshot those and save them in a folder that's called Just Jenna. And I read when I'm going through a really bad day or a printer breaks or, nothing, or, I don't know, something comes in wrong, labels, or, I order packaging and it's one of them was misspelled. And it's like, all right, let's pause. Let's get out your Just Jenna folder and read through why are you doing this? And that's everything.
That's really powerful. Yeah. And I've actually talked to a number of entrepreneurs here on the show over the years who have they don't call it that, but they have a Just Jenna folder just like that.
Yeah. I'd encourage
Amazing.
people to do that. Like, or anything in life. It's like your successes or your wins for the day.
Yeah.
And as silly as they might sound, write them down, like, I don't know. I do that with my son now too. He's 2, but I'm like, it just makes you appreciate what you have when you go back and that when your head, we're human, our heads get in bad spaces sometimes. And it's good to look back there and be like, oh, this is why, or these are my blessings in life. So I would encourage everybody to save a Just Jenna folder.
Right. Yeah. Well, plus, I don't think most people really truly appreciate how powerful appreciation is. I mean, there's like a double thing there, appreciating
It is.
appreciation, but it's incredibly powerful. Not only does it help you, but it has an echo effect or a wave effect, or in other words, the moment that you put appreciation out, it affects other people in ways you don't see.
Gratitude. Yeah. It puts things in perspective. It really
It
does.
does. Yeah. Yeah. I've often found too that people I knew who may have been tangentially involved in something that I was dealing with, and I found a way to get to appreciation mode. It was amazing how often I'd get like a phone call or an email from that person who was similarly tied in,
Mm-hmm.
talking about the same thing that I was expressing the appreciation about, and
Mm-hmm.
telling me some little improvement that happened. That
Yep.
that that's a regular pattern that
That's
happens
awesome.
over and over again.
That's awesome. So
Yeah,
true.
yeah. Now you started the line because of what you just described, but you were also putting out a product, and I imagine that because, like you were saying, this is something that you did from your heart. This is something that matters to you. It's a passion to you.
Yep.
So I imagine the same thing is also going to be true for the design that you do, for the work that you put together,
Yep.
and that it is in some way evocative of who you are and what your mission is. So talk a little bit about the design portion.
Yep. So I started off with when you break down a bike chain, it's only one link. So everyone's like, bike. I'm trying to tell my friends about this before I started it. And then I realized I just needed to keep my mouth shut, execute it. Don't, in life, you shouldn't take any opinions on anything until you're ready to hear the feedback. So
Yeah,
I'm like,
right.
what? I went out there and I was like, here's what I'm going to do. They're like, a bike chain. I'm like, no, it's just one charm. So then I zipped it for a year, put it together. And then I'm like, see, I told you this is what it would look like. And they're like, now I understand. But when you break a piece apart, a bike chain, and by the way, I would go around Columbus and be like to the bike shops and say, hey, do you got any broken chains? And like, what are you doing with those? I was like, I'm just, I look like a loony bin, so I'm going around and collecting all these broken chains. And I bought the tool to see how you could break it down. And when you break apart a chain, it breaks down between a double and a flat. And I use pieces. Like you can see right now I have the double on, but it's connected by a flat. So the flat is more of like the dainty look. And then the double is the chunky look.
Okay.
So I've switched. That's how we started. Like, I mean, me in my living room, degreasing the chain. I've since come a long way since that would have been 2017 because I worked on it in my, living room and trying to plan it out for a year before we launched in the end of 2018. Now I have basically switched metals. So it's, again, hyperallergenic. It's waterproof. I've learned a lot about plating. It's all, it's not filled because, again, I want to stick. My mission is I want to spread our mission, and I want to keep it at a price point that is high quality, but not a $200 piece of jewelry. And maybe again, we'll do a line there someday. But it's all PVD plated, and without going down a rabbit hole, it's vacuum plated. So it's hyperallergenic. It's waterproof. I've had on my gold link for I purposely beat it up. I wear it in the shower. I let my son play with it. But over, years, it will eventually fade like a lighter gold. But it will always fade back to the stainless steel is our base metal. Because I found that that's what people aren't allergic to. So that's how we started. Now, and we had what, I shouldn't say 2 SKUs. We had 2 designs, and then they come in 4 colors. So they come in silver and rose gold, and then gunmetal. Well, now, beaded bracelets are a thing. So I've taken my link and turned it into like a little bead. So we've since expanded, but everything that we create has a link on it, worn as a reminder that you're not alone. So we have many styles now, but degreasing in my living room is how we originally started the design.
Right. Yeah. Well, of course, that's how many businesses start in a living room or in a basement or a garage.
No one had faith in me at that time either.
Right.
Like, I'm like, I can see it where it's going. Just trust in me. So, and they all buy my stuff now, which is funny.
One of the most challenging things, particularly with a customized business, is figuring out how to scale your business. And that's not an easy thing to solve.
No.
What have you figured out there?
Okay. So the chain I used to, and I still do have chain that I would, when you make a necklace, it's the chain, it's the link, which is the charm. There's a jump ring on it. There's a lobster claw closure, and then there's an extender. That is a lot of pieces, to create. And what I found, again, live and learn, and make mistakes and then pivot. You're left with like extra jump rings or after lobster claws or extra, extender. So now I've gone into ordering the full chain with the extender on it. And now I just pop on the link. And if it's shorter, like it's the longest size. So like I like it like the double link. I like to wear long, like with a t-shirt or dressed up, I guess you could say. But and then if it needs shortened, I just cut off the chain real quick and pop it on. So just trying to keep up with the demand. And again, my mission is to grow and to link with as many people as we can. And we've actually been linked in 20 countries now, which I'm very excited about. But I can't keep up with just, hand making everything from piece by piece. It's getting smarter about how I can, batch it, so to speak, and make it in batches with, still being handmade, but just being smarter about how it's handmade.
That's a tough tightrope to walk. I applaud you for how far you figured it out so far, and I'm sure you'll come up with new innovations because that's what happens over time. But man, that's a tough one. That's really tough because it's not like you're mass producing this stuff.
No. Hopefully someday. And then I thought everyone's like, well, you just order it pre-made from China. I'm like, I like where I'm at right now. Who knows where I'll be in 5 years from now? Maybe I would love to like employ people that need work, that to help me do that. But I'll pivot, and I feel like I'll cross that bridge when it comes.
And that's what it is. It's a bridge. It's a bridge to the next place the next destination that you're trying to get to, because this whole entrepreneurship journey is just that. It's a journey. And when you're taking that journey, you're dealing with all the byways and exits and entrance ramps and everything else. That's just part of what happens. So you're really doing it the smart way, because you're saying, well, I don't know what's going to come 5 years down the line. I'll just deal with what's coming next. That's about the best I can handle right now.
I wasn't always like that. So it's funny that you say that. I used to think like bird's eye view way to like, okay, well, it's like, okay, that was my goal actually this year. It's like, I overthink everything. But it was like, all right, just let's think quarterly, not not 5 years from now. Like what's, again, like I just told you, like I don't know where I'll be in 5 years. I don't know how I'm going to mass produce it in 5 years. Hopefully I do need to mass produce it because the demand is so high.
Yeah, right.
But I'm trying to work better, as in like, let's live in the moment, focus on now, and then worry about next year when next year comes.
That's a topic that we've talked about a lot, living in the now.
Yeah. It's
here on
hard
the
for me to
program.
do. It's hard for a lot of people to do because it's like,
It's
what's
hard
next?
for anybody. I mean, let's be honest. We are we're sentient creatures. When you're sentient, you have the ability to think about the past, the future, everything else in between, except for the now. Of course, it's going to be a challenge because you got all this stuff going on in your head all the time.
And
Yeah, so
unknown
that's
is scary. You know, well, what if? Well, what if? It's like you can't live in the what if.
Yeah. So that becomes the challenge. Can we continuously bring ourselves back to the now, back to the now, back to the now, back to the now? And when an entrepreneur is able to do that, that's when the entrepreneur succeeds.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do. I keep myself. I wrote it on my big whiteboard. It's like live in the now, worry and work smarter, not harder. It was like I was trying to wear all these hats, and it's like, no, let's just take a break, work on gold necklaces for today instead of I got to do all these 50 SKUs. It's like I'm trying to plan better and plan ahead better and work again smarter, not harder.
Yeah, I love what you said about not wearing as many hats, because that is another thing that anyone who tries entrepreneurship at one point or another finds himself doing, because they figure, well, I know this. I'm the one who has to solve this. I can't really think of anybody else who can do this as well as I can. I've got to solve all this stuff. That's how people in business for themselves end up working 80-hour weeks, because they feel like I can't hand this off to someone. This is too specialized. This involves me too much. I can't just mass produce this thing, whatever this thing is that I'm dealing with. And the real challenge is recognizing that you actually can. You just have to find a way that works, that actually does it. I mean, and that's really the measure of success for an entrepreneur, because when the entrepreneur is able to dish off as much as possible of what it is they're doing, first of all, that's when they become more successful. Second of all, it's when they become less stressed. Third, it's when their employees start to love them more. But it's doesn't make it any easier. It's just as hard to hand it off.
I struggled with that too. And it's how I was raised. Like we were raised to work hard, and you know what I mean? Like nothing is given to you. So I went into it like, oh no, not lazy, but like, I mean, I never felt lazy, but like you don't delegate work. Like you do it all yourself. And now again, that was another goal of mine this year. I hired an e-commerce coach actually. And they've checked me with a lot of things. Like, is this getting you to your 10 out of 10 goal? If it's not, then don't do it. And I'm like, so that was the best investment. It was my goal this year. As my New Year's resolution was to invest in myself, not spend money on myself, but to invest in myself. And she's taught me a lot,
good distinction.
Follow who has already done it instead of I used to just spin my wheels with all my friends. It's like, well, my friends haven't started an e-commerce business. You know what I mean? I'm having a 3-hour event session with all my friends, or I could just hire an e-commerce coach that's in 10 minutes, no, focus on this, Yeah,
you want somebody who's been there, done that, not somebody who's just got an opinion about being there and doing that.
Yeah, totally true.
Yep. Something else that comes to my mind too. There was a reel, I guess you'd call it now with the modern technology, but it was before they called it reels, that Will Smith, the actor, did that got published, I think, on Instagram a number of years ago. And he was basically just driving in his car and riffing into his phone while he's driving on the subject of success and failure. And I don't remember the whole thing that he was saying, but the one piece that stuck with me is where he says, people who see a successful person like a successful actor, because obviously he's an actor, who see a successful actor they don't see the failures leading up to the success. All they see is the success. So the tendency is to believe that, well, they're just lucky, or they were always successful, or it came easy, and none of that is ever true, or not ever, but it's very rare for any of that to play out in the way that those suppositions think that they play out. It usually follows with one failure and then another failure, and then a success, and then another failure and another success, and it's like a stumbling thing all the way along. We kind of forget about that.
It's so key. I always tell. Well, I actually jotted down the Will Smith video. I'll have to find that. I'm not familiar with that one, but it's so true. I never read the headlines, like from rags to riches. That's not true. You did not go from rags to riches. Like Oh, like I feel like for me, like, oh, did you hear her dad passed away and she just stumbled across this bike chain and now she's linked in 20 countries. It's like, no, you weren't there for the blood, sweat, and tears and the wrong orders and the messing up the metals and the, oh, it's itching me because there's nickel on it and the wasted money. I mean, there's a lot of things that are hidden in the A to Z a lot. And I always tell my husband, like, I never read the headlines anymore. It's like, well, what really, really happened? There's so many things packed in that people only want to hear the headline or the A to Z, or again, the rags to riches. Or Sarah Blakely actually talks about that all the time. The founder of Spanx, like, oh, I just cut the legs off my pantyhose and became a billionaire. She's like, no, that's not how that works. That's not how that works. There's a whole journey in there that's full of ups and downs. And that's why I say, I feel like the successful, not always, but a lot of times the successful entrepreneur is just the one that just doesn't give up, because there are those tears and I can't do this anymore. And oh my gosh, it's like, and you feel guilty. Like, you're crying to your husband about, should I give up on this? And it's like, no, and then it's taken on your family. It's like, those are journeys of entrepreneurship or starting. I feel like a lot of things in life. So
it's almost a rite of passage, really, when you're going through something like that.
I never read the headlines anymore, or I do, and it's like, all right, I got to.
No, but I mean, when you go through the rough stuff, that's what I mean. When you're going through those crazy times, like you said, where I don't know if I should keep going with this. I can't make sense out of it. That's the rite of passage.
Yes,
it is. That's the part where you're basically earning your medal.
Yes. Like, and I always say, like, give me a sign. Sometimes I don't get them and sometimes I do. I'm like, that's a little, or like, oh, an order just came in. That was my sign. Just keep going. Get out your Just Jenna folder. Those are the times that you get out your Just Jenna folder and you read like your successes and, again, why you're doing what you're doing, or that positive, like, hey, the sad text messages that I get, like, my daughter is really struggling with depression. I just bought her one of your pieces. I mean, I read that and I'm like, all right, get on your big girl pants and keep going, because this is why you're doing what you're doing. It's not about you. It's about, helping others as a reminder that they're not alone. So that's why you're doing what you're doing. Just keep going. It's worth the tears.
That's another theme that is true of literally every interview that I do here on the show. Somebody going through something, usually there's a crash and burn followed by a rise afterward. And then they learn something from it. They discover something. They find a passion or whatever, and it turns into what they want to share with the world. And now it becomes, here's a way that I can serve the world. That theme, serving the world, particularly that part.
Yep.
That's universal.
It was for me, and I didn't understand it. This is why I say, if I could tell anybody in the pit, life is full of peaks and valleys, and you really do have to learn to find beauty in both. But I always say, lean on your links in life and you can get through anything. But I didn't see it at the time. So sometimes it's good that I see bird's eye view and like look at the bigger picture. And then other times it's like, no, focus on the moment. But I did that drive home from Florida with, again, no radio on. Like, what am I going to tell people? This is embarrassing. I was 2 weeks into turning 30 years old. And here I was supposed to get married the following month. And, the rug was ripped out from underneath me. And not only that, I was grieving the loss of my father, but it was like, I didn't see it. And now it all makes sense. So when somebody's in the pit, I always say, just there is a peak coming in your life, even if you can't understand it at the present time.
That's a really key point you just made right there. One that we have touched on before, but I like the way you expressed it, because we deal with life. Life is just muddy.
It's muddy.
It is.
Yes.
It's a mess, and when you're dealing with the mess, especially in the early stages of dealing with the mess, you can't even begin to see how it could actually be clean, let alone what clean could actually accomplish.
Yep.
It just doesn't seem possible at that point. You can't visualize it. You try. I mean, you try to visualize it, right? You try to envision where you want to go and so forth, but you can't really. And when, like you said, when something goes wrong, when the order, you put the money on the wrong thing or whatever, you can't see how this could possibly turn into anything useful.
Right.
Because that just, I threw half my money away on this stupid thing that didn't work. That was a failure. I lost out of that. And yet, every time that somebody comes onto the program to tell their story, it's always the same thing. They learn the most from the failure. The failure contributed to some major thing that they got later on that turned into something else that was completely unexpected, that mapped out to this thing that they could never have figured out on their own.
Right. Right. You just got to stay positive, because I feel like in hard times in life, some people just cave, and it's like, of course, in the present, of course, you're going to cave, you're going to have a hard time, but it's like, again, focus on that. The peak is coming. Like if you look at your life as like a book, you're in the crappy chapter, like, the page will turn, it's a page will turn. Just keep moving forward and keep focusing. And again, keep leaning on your links in life, and you'll get through it. You will get through it, even if you can't understand it in the present moment.
Yeah, let's talk about those links, because I like that concept a lot as well. You've taken it in a slightly different direction from the way I normally do, but I want to bring that in, because when I talk about the links, the connections is what I'm thinking of. The
Yep.
connections that we
Yep.
have with other
Yep.
people. I think more often in terms of the connections with people that we deliberately make. Who we choose as our friends, our our associates, our business associates, family, husband, wife, whatever. All those different kinds of connections are the ones I usually talk about. But you're talking about a slightly different variation on it, which is a really cool one.
Yep.
It's heartbreaking at times, but it's a very cool one. The idea that if you connect in somebody who is struggling with, and I don't know, you may have a better way of expressing this than I do, with something bigger than themselves is the best way I can think of to say it.
Yep.
And then let them use that as a vehicle to get their story out. It produces unexpected results. It produces an outcome that nobody really anticipated, but everybody benefited from.
Yes.
Talk about that.
So actually, I was going to draw it. One of my first notebooks, like the year. So when I was driving back, I was calling friends. When I say links, it is the connection. That's, the people are my links in life. So like I called my friend and I was like, I've paid for everything since I was in middle school. Like I can't just leave my job and come back home. Jenna, put your mental health, but for real though, it's scary. It's like, oh, they see my life now and they're like, it worked out. But when you're in that, like, moment where you're the unknown, and just, it's very, very scary. Like
Yes.
and I was buried in student loans that were reoccurring. I knew if I delayed them, then they would just be even more. So she said, Jenna, just come back and put your mental health first. I mean, huge to me. And then, so on the drive, and then I'm calling my friends like, oh, what am I going to tell people? Blah, blah. That's what I mean when I say like lean on those links. So I actually, the why was always there before I ran into that bike chain. It was like, how, thinking deep, again, no radio on, like these connections in my life. I didn't call them links at the time. They were connections, because the link hadn't, the verb of the link and the jewelry, or the broken bike chain hadn't come to me yet. But I was thinking like, all right, here's Angie and Mimi, and these are all my friends, and my family. We came very close after my father passed away, but like we all connect, and like Angie lost her father. We connected in that way. One of my other friends struggled with like body image issues, which I actually did when I was like in high school. It's like that's so powerful. The power of connection is just amazing. So it was in my head, like, how can I was thinking at the time, like secret pen pals, or it's like, talk to your connections or your links when you're going through something really difficult in life. And I'm not a mental health therapist. Obviously, I did actually talk to a therapist as well, but I'm talking obviously in social support. Obviously I think that you should get therapy as well if that's what you need, just as a disclaimer.
Sure.
I'm not a mental health therapist, but when I say your links or your connections, it's vital to anybody. It's reaching out when you need support. And that's how I got through what I went through. So when I came home, I actually drew a picture of a link, like a circle, and I like arrowed my friends off of it. Like, I connect with Angie like this. I connect with my other friend like this. And this is kind of like who saved me, through that tough time. So it's like, they were my links at the time, but I didn't, the bike chain didn't come to me till a couple of years after that. But I knew, I actually had in my notebook too, it was like, maybe I could sell something that layers, like how do we connect, or like things that layer together, so the why was there on the connections, and, using, again, your links, I always keep saying, as a resource, and to help you get through that pit or that valley that you're in. It was there, but it didn't come to me. The idea of the business didn't come to me. And that's why, when people are like, oh, you just randomly ran across a bike chain, you're like, aha. It was like, no, the why and the connections were always there. It was then like when I looked down at the chain, it was like, this is how I can connect people. And then they'll get a story with their jewelry. So that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I want to go a little deeper into the connection part, the link part.
Hmm.
Because one of the things we've talked a lot about the importance of connection, and I'll tell you the story that I often tell here on
Yeah.
the show. I've told other guests and so forth. Are you familiar with Sean Aker? He's one of the spokesmen of the positive psychology movement that's emerged over the last 25 years or so.
It sounds familiar, but yes, it sounds familiar.
He wrote the book The Happiness Advantage, if you recognize that title.
Yes, I do. Yep, that's where.
So when he was promoting the Happiness Advantage, he had a very successful tour and ended up on PBS. And on PBS, they recorded it, and I actually got a hold of the DVD of that, and so I could hear the whole thing. It was very cool. But he did something in that. To this day, if I ever meet this guy, I'm going to pin him against the wall, saying, "Why aren't you talking about this?" But anyway, after he'd done his entire thing, because when you're doing a book promotion, you basically work through the book as you're giving your talk and so forth, and that's what he did, and that's what most of the DVD was about. And then at the very end, he says, "Okay, we're done with that. Just one other thing I wanted to share with you, and it's not something that's in the book. It's something that he only has shared on this one DVD." But he says he was at Harvard. He was both an undergraduate at Harvard. He was also a residential advisor, and then he worked in the original founding of the positive psychology department within the larger psychology department.
Okay.
And he was involved in a lot of studies. He ran a lot of studies. That's what they do all the time when you're at Harvard. Harvard, basically, you go to school and you do studies. That's it. But he decided to do a study. He was trying to help the kids who are at Harvard, because anybody who goes to Harvard, they come from the top of their class from wherever they went to school, right? So they were always the valedictorians, or maybe the salutarians, but
Right.
they were always at the very, very top. And then they get into Harvard and they find that everybody else is just as good as they are.
Yep.
So it's a very different situation from what they're used to. So the stress levels are incredible. They're like right off the scale. And he was trying to figure out, how can I help these very, very skilled, talented young people to let go of their stress and go after the success that they really need to go after in their lives. So he decided he was going to do a study to figure out, well, what is the cause of success, and can we predict whether or not, if you're doing X, Y, or Z, you're going to be successful. So they did the study, and he put together this long questionnaire. I don't even know how long it was, but it sounded pretty long from the way he was describing it. And it turned out nothing on the questionnaire correlated. They couldn't find a correlation between, and he was asking about everything, like, what's your family, what are your study habits, what are you majoring in, do you have a dream business that you're trying to create? I mean, he was exploring all this stuff. He couldn't find any correlations except for one question that he threw in as an afterthought before he just put the survey out there to about 1,000 people there at Harvard University. And that one question was about social connections. What he discovered is that the correlation between your social connections and the likelihood of your success or failure in life is 0.7. And for those who don't know statistics, that means that 7 times out of 10, that one factor is going to be predictive of whether or not you're succeeding or failing in life. And as a way of comparing it, he said the correlation between smoking cigarettes and getting cancer is 0.44. So it shows you just how strong this correlation is. And from the moment that I heard that, I said, wow, that is huge.
Huge.
And why don't we know about this study? That's the other thing I said. Right. I still haven't found this study anywhere else.
I'm jotting down notes. I'm like, I can't wait to go look them up. I know I've heard of the Happiness Advantage.
If you find that study, let me know. I swear, I have been looking everywhere for it. The only place I can find it is on that one DVD.
Huh.
But those correlations of social connections being that important in your life shows a couple things to me. First of all, it shows not just how important it is to have many of the connections, but also how deep those connections are. And what strikes me about your story is that you're tying people and the connections to people based upon common experiences they have with tragedy, with challenges, with hardships. And when I realized, well, that's where we do most of our learning from, what we're talking about here is creating the strongest kind of indicator for your success or failure in life based on the thing that we learn the most from.
Yep.
That's pretty damn powerful.
Yep. Because what's the opposite of that? It's being alone. People don't want to be, you know what I mean? When you find somebody that, like, I felt alone, like that's why I started my business. It's like, if somebody, like, you have those negative thoughts, like, oh my gosh, if somebody can't love me at my worst, and when I lose my thought, who's going to love me? I mean, those are the type of things that are running through your head. And by the way, I am remarried and I have a beautiful family now, but it's like the opposite of that is being alone. So when you're making these social connections of, other people and it's anything in life. It's connections and who you hang around with. And it is why the way you are. When I'm trying to be fit and I'm hanging around other people that are like being fit and working out. I mean, you know what I mean? You got to
You
hang
just
around.
anticipated my next question. So are you selective about who you're connected to?
Can I give you my corny response?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll give you I tell my sister this, and people are like, "You're such a weirdo, Jenna," but I'll give it to you because I am an extrovert. I have a lot of friends.
Okay.
In my head, I have a triangle. And so people are like, "Oh, you give to everyone." It's like, yeah, but they're at the bottom of my triangle. They're like a high. So yes, I have a ton of connections, but I have really protected my energy since, again, having my son the past couple of years. It's like, if you're not very, very close friends or family, I don't answer my phone for you anymore, like all the time. Like, and you have to do that to protect your own energy. I'm still there for you, but it's more of on my time. So if you're at the top of my triangle, I say like my family and my closest friends, and then it's like I have a high and by connections as well. So I mean, connections to me is broad. But I think you can have different levels of connections, if that makes sense. Maybe my corny triangle drawing in my head, I'm a visualist, but do you know what I mean? It's like, yes, I have a lot of connections, but I protect my energy and time a lot more than I used to. I used to be a yes person. I ended up laying in bed fatigued and tired, and now you can't do that. You have to protect your energy. So I do have a lot of connections, but yeah.
That's interesting to me because I am originally very introverted. I've learned how to be more extroverted over time, but my origin was very introverted. So when you're introverted, you don't tend to have lots of connections. You have very, very few connections. And if you can develop one or two that are really good, that's like, oh my God, it's my lifeline. I've got something to hang on to there. So for somebody like me, the idea of, well, I got all these connections all over the place, I'm just going to decide which ones I'm going to put at the top of the triangle. Like, holy crap, that was never even within my realm of possibilities.
So my best friends are introverts. It's funny that you say that. Some of my best friends are introverts. We just click like glue. I mean, yeah. So they're at the top of my triangle. Some of my best friends are introverts. But yeah, I think just protect it. You can have a lot of connections. You can have a lot of people that make a difference in your life. It's just, you only have I always say it like you have a bucket of energy. You can't keep depleting it. You have to, fill it up. And who's filling that cup or that bucket for you? Those are the connections that you need to keep on and move to the top of your triangle.
Well, I can honestly say I'm surprised that you have introverted friends.
Yeah.
The reason I say that I can't say I'm surprised by that is because the one thing you do learn as an introvert is when you do get a good connection, you value it like crazy.
Yeah.
I think introverts probably kind of come right out of the gate with a better appreciation than an extrovert does, because it's so easy for an extrovert to just make the connections all over the place. So I wouldn't be surprised. This is why I'm not surprised by the fact that you have so many introverted friends. I wouldn't be surprised if some of them influenced you to be more selective about how you're going to be spending your time.
I never thought about that, but maybe they did. Like, I never thought about that, but maybe that is why I'm a little bit more selective with my time. Maybe they did do that.
Because I mean, there's strengths on both sides, right? I mean,
sure is.
Extroversion has definite strengths. Introversion, it turns out, it has strengths
a lot
too.
of strengths. They do. Oh my gosh, yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I've also learned the value of trying to achieve balance there. And again, I think this also ties into connections, because I realized that if you have too few connections, even if you have one or two that are good ones, it's not enough. You really do need to build out your connection circle.
Yep.
And that's the big challenge for an introvert, because it's not easy for an introvert to do. But nevertheless, I made a point to do that. And over time, I have succeeded in doing that. But that when you can achieve that balance between what I'll call the extroversion and the introversion approach, although really it's more a balance between how many close friends do you have? How many, like you think of it in terms of a triangle. I think of it in terms of like concentric circles. Who's the closest circle, who's the further out circle, and so on and so forth.
That's interesting.
And who are those connections, and what are the natures of those connections? When you can build those out, that's how I achieved a more balanced approach. Because like you cultivated these introverted friends, I cultivated more extroverted friends. And in doing that, we balance ourselves out.
Yes.
So what
That's interesting. Now
you
that
know,
you say that, I'm like, when I've struggled with balance a lot.
mm,
I'm a yes person. I like to help everyone, and
mm,
you can't all the time, and especially if you want to be happy within yourself, you only have a bucket of energy every day. You got to fill it and give some, and fill it back up and give some. But I've struggled with balance my whole life. But maybe it's interesting you say that. Maybe I had a lot too many extroverts at the time, and maybe now I am a little bit more balanced, because in my case the top of my triangle is maybe some more
yeah,
introverts. That's interesting.
I wouldn't be at all surprised. I think that's true, and I think it works both ways. Um, I think it's also an important indicator of what makes a good connection, what makes a connection work.
Yeah,
Because it is not just is it one of a quantity, it's also what's the depth of the connection. And
very.
one of the things I've learned over time is each connection that I have is going to be different. The depth of each connection is going to be different.
Hmm.
But my goal becomes how deep can I make each one? I'm
Yes,
curious, is that something similar to what you do?
yes, yes, it is. Yep, definitely. And that's where the ones that I think of it like energy again, my bucket, as like the ones that are giving me back. I used to just feel so depleted sometimes by hanging
Mm,
out with so many people, and then the next day, hey, do you want to do this? Yes, yes, yes. And then that's
mhm.
on me to be like, no, actually, I'm busy. But it's a give and a take. The ones that I almost can't explain it, but the ones that I have really deep connections with, they're filling back up my bucket in some
Yes.
way. The
Yeah.
conversation just fills my soul. And those are my best friends, which again, a lot of them are introverts, but yeah, you go deep with those type of people that fill up your bucket and give you as much as you give them.
So with this as a big setup, I'm going to ask you a point blank question. Who have you learned the most from in your life?
Geez, that's a question nobody's ever asked me. My mom.
Yeah.
My mom, because she's hardworking. And at the end of the day, like my jewelry line is inspired by my dad, but
Mhm.
my mom is the hard worker. I mean, not that my dad wasn't, but
Sure.
don't give up. Just keep moving. Nothing's handed to you. You got to, you know what I mean? So just keep moving. And that's honestly why I feel like a lot of other people, or even old Jenna, would have given up on my business, because hiccups happen, things happen. But my mom taught me to get through those peaks and those valleys. So I would say my mom for sure.
So you mentioned the younger or the older Jenna, depending on how you want to look at it. But if you were sitting down with the Jenna who had just figured out the whole idea about the bicycle link and how that's a metaphor for a business she wanted to start, what would you say to her?
I would say it's even the Jenna in the car ride home. Like, you got this. You know what I mean? Like, you got this. You'll get through it. And that's what I would say to anyone, going through a tough time. Like, you'll figure it out. You don't like, that's why I'm practicing now to like live in the present and focus on the next, live in the now. It's like, you'll figure it out. You'll get through it, and focus on your why. Whenever you focus on your why, like, go back to your why. When stuff breaks, go back to your why. Printer breaks, go back to your why. Influencer doesn't like your stuff, go back to your why. And you'll get through it. So I would tell that Jenna, the broken Jenna,
Mhm.
that don't give up, just turn the page. You know what I mean? There's another page in your book, and just keep moving forward and keep plowing away and keep focusing on gratitude and writing down the things that you're thankful for. And that'll get you to the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day.
And for those people, because there are a number of people who fall in this category, if for those people who have trouble finding their why, what would you recommend for them?
I feel like everybody has a why. They just might not have found it yet. So
Yeah.
it's like gratitude. If you write down, like, journal what you're gratitude for, and I feel like your why will come when you're grateful. So I mean, for me, it was helping others. That's obviously a passion of mine, and making it known that when people are going through a tough time, they're not alone. But I think everybody has a why. I really do. And I think that if you journal and think about what you're grateful for, maybe make your own just Jenna folder and write down your positives, it'll come to you. It'll come to you.
But
Practice gratitude.
we're touching on some of the things that we've talked about for years here on the program, journaling being one of them, focusing on what you appreciate, on gratitude and so forth. But we often talk about it in the abstract, but the way you're talking about it is quite concrete. because it is something to be used in the midst of the worst of times, as well as
Right.
other times too. I mean, you
Right.
don't just stop doing it just because you climbed out of the worst of times, but you especially need it during the worst of times.
Yep.
Because
And if you write down what you're grateful for, it'll come. I really believe it'll come.
yeah,
Your why will come.
you won't necessarily know when.
Right.
You won't necessarily know how it's going to come. You just got to keep going, knowing that somehow you're going to get through it somehow. Funny thing, we all come through it. Isn't that an odd thing?
We do. I was just at a business, like an entrepreneur conference, and she said, "Oh, say what's your why?" And for me, I'm like, "Oh, I have my why." But other people, she's like, "Did anybody write down money? Do you mind if I use you as an example, for business?" And she said, "Come up, Sarah, or come up to the stage." And she asked her like in-depth questions, and she said, "I just would love to take my son to Disney World and da-da-da." And then she started, and that's your why. Your why is your son. You know what I mean? So I feel like if you just write down the things that it's not money at the end of the day, sure, we all like money. Who doesn't want to make money? But what's your real why?
Yeah.
Start practicing gratitude and what you're thankful for. And I think it'll come.
Yeah. Money is a means. It's not the end. We tend to treat it the other way around. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but it's just a means. That's all it is, and it's an energetic means. So it's something to be appreciated and understand what the nature of it is. And the more that you can understand it, the more easy it is to deal with money issues as they come up. If you can learn that money is an energy, that money is it's not something that is an object that has to be acquired. It's something that has to be flowed. Once you learn that, that's probably the biggest lesson right there. Trying to figure out how money flows.
Right. And for me, I believe that if you are constantly focusing on your why, eventually it'll come. Like if you're if you're focused, because when people go into something with just money, when stuff happens that's bad, it will, like hiccups happen in any business. They're easy. Oh, the money's not coming. See ya. It's like, well, when you're wise in it and you're wanting to, for example, this woman to take your kid to Disney World, why are you going to quit the next day? No, because your son is in your mind. You know what I mean? So I believe that if you focus on your why and your bigger purpose, that the money will eventually come. Maybe it's not your first business, or you know what I mean? Or maybe you'll make some mistakes or pivot, and that's normal. But I think whenever you really go back to your why and have that in the back of your head, money usually trickles from there.
That's a really, really good way of describing it. I love that. Stay on your why. Be in the why. Yeah. Because the why is where you get your energy. It's where you get your drive. It's where you get your motivation to keep going.
Right.
And it's where things happen too.
Right. And I had to pivot many times. You know what I mean? Like I've switched from my traditional links to bracelets or whatever the case may be. I'm not saying it comes easy, but it's like when you have your why in the back of your head, you will pivot, you will make changes, you will, because it's for a bigger purpose, or whether it's your son or, your mission or whatever the case is. I think that a lot of times that's when the money kind of rolls in.
I love something else you mentioned in there. I think you described it as inspiration, but when that inspiration comes, we don't necessarily realize it's inspiration.
Right.
I mean, it's just like, well, that's just a possible solution. It isn't until after you've gone through and looked back, you say, oh, wow, I was inspired to do that. And I didn't even realize it at the time.
Right.
So again, part of the challenge here is not just recognizing inspiration when it comes to you, but acting on it.
Right.
How do you do that?
For me, I'm a God person. Like I pray, I believe in God. I ask for the sign, and sometimes it's not what you want, but it's like, it's a gut feeling. Maybe for somebody it's spiritual. For me, it's God. For somebody else, it might be spiritual, or it's a gut feeling. Like that's what I go by, is like, think on, like, you think that when I first found that bike chain, I was like, this is it. Yes. I'm going to be linked in 20 countries. It's like, no. This, and you ask for the sign. And again, I took a year to even figure out my initial couple SKUs before I even launched. And then I pivoted a million times from there. But it's just, you still have doubt. Anybody has doubt. I have doubt, am I crazy? Like, who's going to wear this? And now it's like, and then, you get all right, give me a sign, you know what I mean? And then you get a little sign. And it's like, that's what I needed. So for me, it's like, for some people it's spiritual or a gut feeling. For me, it's like a God feeling, I guess you could say, but that's how I know to keep going, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, it makes total sense. And I think you've touched on a key point, which is that everybody is going to experience it differently based on what their own
Yeah,
belief system is. Your belief system
exactly.
drives your experience.
Yeah. Some people are like, it's my gut. Like, yeah, then your intuition, then then that's how you know. That's how
Yeah.
you know you're meant to do it.
Yeah. For me, it's when I have something that's presented to me or something occurs to me or whatever, and I check it against how am I feeling about it. Does it feel good? To me, that's my indicator. If it
Yes.
feels good, like that's where I need to go.
Yeah.
Even though my common sense is saying, "Are you crazy? That's the
Yeah.
stupidest thing you could do." But if it
Right.
feels good, I'll go with it anyway.
Right. If
Which
it's
was a
in
huge
your,
breakthrough.
like I've done things that have made me uncomfortable, like live takeovers and, news interviews or whatever the case may be. If it's if it's a fear that's like a good fear, then you need to jump into that fear. If it's a fear, like sick feeling, like this isn't serving me, then
Right.
you know what I mean? That's a
Stay
big
away from
difference.
that
If
one.
you have to get uncomfortable. Like you have to change happens when you're in an uncomfortable place. I do believe that too, but it's like, what really is that fear? Is it because you're afraid to do it and then you should do
Mhm.
it? Or
Mhm.
is it a fear like, this isn't serving my 10 out of 10 life? Then maybe it's not the right sign.
And that can take a while to learn that. I
And
mean,
it
it's not like
totally
you
can take a
instantly
while.
know that one. You may have to kind of experiment a little bit and see, okay, I tried this one, what was the result? I tried that, I got the
Yeah.
result there. Oh, now I'm getting a feel for where the gauge is. Now I'm getting a feel for
Patience.
where the range is.
Exactly, like the link. That's why in the beginning, like, A to Z. That's why I don't read the headlines. It's like I didn't just stumble across this chain. I was like, this is my sign. It's like there was a lot of emotion. There was a lot of doubt. There was a lot of you know, are people going to like this? So
Sure.
that's anything in life. And you don't, right? Patience. You don't maybe figure it out right away. And for some people, it's weeks, and some people, it's months, and some people, for me, it was years. But at the end of the day, I feel like as time goes on, you get better clarification on, if it's your why.
So thank you. First of all, this has been a great conversation. Tell people again, people are going to want to find, what the jewelry looks like and what the stories look like. How are they going to find all this stuff?
Thank you so much for having me. It was an awesome conversation. I agree. But the website is linkbeforeyousink.com. So link and then sink like a kitchen sink. So linkbeforeyousink.com. And that's our Facebook and Instagram as well, is at Link Before You Sink. And then Facebook is Link Before You Sink is the page.
Okay, we'll include a link in the
You're
in the
punny, Walt.
we'll include a link in the show notes to make it also easy for people. One other thing I want to tell you too, that I make it a point of telling all guests who come onto the show, because like I said before, everybody comes on here, they want to give in some way, and you're clearly another example. Here's somebody else who, I found this thing, I've got this great thing I want to share, I want to give to the world. And I'm sure you do it through not just this podcast, but other podcasts. I know you do it through your blog, because you mentioned the blog, probably a lot of different ways, social media and so forth, that you share your message and that you give to people. There are a lot of people that we give to that we never meet, we never see, we never hear from them, we don't know what's going on with them, but they pick stuff up and they use it in some way, and then they benefit from it.
Yeah.
And I think we should be recognizing that some
Yeah.
more. So on behalf of all those people you've never met and that you've never seen, who you have helped in ways that you didn't know about, thank you for what you're doing and for what you're continuing to do.
Thank
Because
you.
you're making a difference in this world.
Oh, that means a lot, and I really, really appreciate that. Oh, and I meant to tell you too, I'm going to set up a promo code for anybody that's listening or watching.
Oh,
Yeah, it's promo code would be LOA 25, and that would be 25% off your first purchase.
whoa.
I will set that up.
Whoa. Okay. We'll make sure we'll include that in the show notes too. So very
Yes.
cool. LOA 25. All right.
LOA 25 for 25% off your first purchase.
5% off first purchase. Very cool. All right. Well, thank you very much. And on behalf of those people who I don't know who are hearing this, thank you for helping them with that 25% off. That's a cool thing.
Yeah. And obviously, again, I know I have a product. I sell a product, but I always clarify. You can link with us by sharing your story. You can send us a contact us. There are other ways to link other than just purchasing a product. So purchasing a product is great, but if you wanted to share your story or reach out, just go to the top of the page. If you drop down, there's a share your story button right at the header of the website.
That's important because that means it's not just for people you've known or whatever. You
Right.
want people's stories. You want people,
Yes.
even somebody who doesn't know you, who just heard you on a podcast, you
Yeah.
want their story too.
Yeah, I want to hear from you. So that's what I do. It's like, yes, I have an e-commerce business and I sell a product, but again, the linking is through the verb, and that's sharing your story and giving others the gift of hope. So if you can't get, if you're not interested in a product, that's okay. You can reach out or share your story. We would love to link with you.
Jenna, thanks for joining me on the show. This has been a lot of fun. It's been
So
very
much fun.
educational, gotten some good stuff out of you. Man, you're a good teacher. You're a really, really good teacher.
Oh, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.